Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this webinar and welcome. I'm Alexander, the founder of Bloom. We supply vetted and experienced charity freelancers for interim, part-time or project work. If you want to find out how this works in practice, then next Wednesday you can join Ginny Cullen, who's the chief exec of Casbah, who will share how she goes about hiring and managing freelancers. So please join us for that. Details on the email that follows today's webinar. On which note, a bit of admin before we begin. Please keep yourselves on mute throughout the webinar. If you have any questions or comments, then write them in the chat box and Penny will do her best to respond as we go along or else possibly at the end. This is being recorded, so don't share anything you wouldn't be happy sharing with a wider audience. And obviously, I'm thrilled today that we have Penny Wilson with us. I can't think of anybody better qualified to talk about the topic of trustees. So I will just let her get on with it. Over to you, Penny.
Thank you, Alexander. Morning, everybody. Friday morning to talk about getting the most out of our trustee boards. There, I'm sure, is nowhere you'd rather be. Let me share my slides.
Oh,
Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to ask you what you want from your board. We're going to talk about unhelpful board behaviour. We're going to talk about what we think trustees need to know to be effective and how they need to behave to be effective. Then we're going to come on to what can actually help trustees to be effective, which is kind of the whole reason for being here. And then I'm going to leave you with some common mistakes that I see when I'm working with trustees and people that work with trustees. So, quick introduction to me. I'm a charity governance consultant. I spend my time writing, talking, and training on trustee issues. Most of my training is rooms like this with people from multiple organisations all at once. So, most of my training is through charity networks, funders, CVSs, and so on. I'm the director of the Festival of Trusteeship for Eastside People, which is the largest gathering of trustees in the UK. It's in November for Trustees Week. Please do join us. We had 1,600 people last year. I was the CEO of a charity called Getting on Board, which was a trustee diversity and development charity which trained 10,000 trustees a year. And in my work now, I work with thousands and thousands of trustees, aspiring trustees, and people who work with trustees every year. And I'm also a trustee myself, of course. I don't think I could do this if I wasn't. I'm a trustee at London Plus. Couple, just to add to Alexander's housekeeping, if I'm asking you a question and you want to respond in the chat, but you don't want other people to see your answer because perhaps it's a bit sticky, perhaps you're going through something sticky or tricky at the moment, please feel free to put it in the chat in a direct message to me, and then I can look at it, potentially read it out, but I will anonymize it. I probably won't have, I may not be able to read every comment, I must say, because there's quite a lot of people in the room. Some of your organisations will have staff and some won't. We've almost certainly got a massive variety in the room of size, of context, and a stage in that some of you may be at crisis stage, some of you might be at a kind of steady state. So we'll try and be as relevant as possible for that huge mixture. A little bit of framing before I ask Anna to launch a poll. So I think it's probably important that you know that I think trustees, charity staff, and CEOs are an incredible bunch of people. I've been all of those things. I think we're incredible. I do, however, think that most of us can do a little bit better. Like all humans can mostly do a little bit better in a lot of the things that we get up to. And sometimes we make our own lives a bit more difficult than we need to. So let's kick off. Anna, if you could please launch the first poll. So this poll is going to ask you which hat you're wearing. It's anonymous. You can tick as many as you like. So tick away and then submit your answers. If it doesn't work for you, feel free to put it in the chat. If you're on a phone or if your device isn't up to date, it might not work, but hopefully for most people it should work. Great. So answers still coming in. Okay. So we've got a real mixture here, haven't we? We've got about a third of people who are trustees. We've got a lot of chairs, which I would have expected. And we've got a lot of CEOs. 40% of you are CEOs, which I would have expected. And then a quarter of you are another member of charity staff. Of course, these are most likely in multiple organisations in many cases as well. So you're working with the board in another way. And 14% charity advisors. So that will be people perhaps who are recruiters or lawyers or charity consultants and so on. Thank you. That's wonderful. Yes, you will get the slides. Thank you. Thank you, Anna. You don't have to furiously scribble. So there we go. That's the results of who we've got in the room. So I want to ask you a question, and please tell us in the chat what you want from your board. Um, why have you come? What do you want from your board? And this might be multiple things. You might have a quick fire list, or it might be something really specific. What do you want from your board? Interesting. Thank you. So brilliant. They're coming in now. Um, Layla, clarity on long-term strategic direction. Great. Straight in with the meaty stuff. Jenny, expertise and objective oversight. Jan, to take more leadership and decisions. Strategic direction, governance, oversight, and effective decision making. Wonderful. Joanne, more of trustees to do stuff outside the meetings. Shamil, understand the realities of fundraising and changing landscape. January, direction. Thank you. Karen, to be able to steer the charity in the right direction. Andrew, I want passion, committed, reasonable governance, and a bit extra as we're a very small charity. Yeah, thank you. Jane, genuine interest, empathy, and curiosity. Jane, have you seen my next slide? And Lorna, advice, discussion, input from day-to-day running of the charity. Hannah, proactive support, guidance, and engagement. I'm going to stop after Rachel, so apologies if you're still typing. Rachel, trust, appropriate challenge, consistency, and commitment beyond the meeting. Wonderful. It feels like there's some big asks there, aren't they? Aren't there? But they are all completely reasonable. I haven't seen anything there in your comments that I think, well, that's not the job of boards. Actually, I think they're all very reasonable. So here are some things that I came up with, and I think you could have answered this question in many different ways. So the first people that answered it were answering very much from this is the role of trustees, so they need to set the strategy, they need to show direction, and so on. I was thinking of it in terms of people and kind of what people bring, how they behave, and I think some of these came out quite strongly. Support, respect, trust, and empathy for each other for the difficult roles we're taking. Time and how much time depends on the charity, doesn't it? And it also depends the stage we're at. And somebody said, a couple of people said they wanted more time. Obviously, if you are a smaller charity, trustees will be operational as well. So you're going to need operational time as well as strategic time. And I'm just going to pick out another couple here. I'm going to pick out challenge. Yes, Rachel, you did say challenge. I wondered if nobody would say challenge because actually it's the job of trustees to challenge each other and to challenge staff. But actually, sometimes we're not great at wanting challenge. I think particularly as CEOs, where sometimes life is easier without challenge, but that isn't great governance. And let me also pick up bravery. So what I mean by bravery is bravery to call each other out. If we think something, for example, perhaps we see a conflict of interest, bravery to call out poor behaviour by other trustees, bravery for our cause as well, so that we're not just really focusing on the risk register and being as careful as possible, but actually we're being brave about our decisions and we're being brave to campaign for change in whatever area we're working in. And I'll just pick out humility and curiosity as well. So trustees that don't think they know it all, we don't want trustees that think they know it all. No trustee knows it all. Newsflash. So actually we need that humility and curiosity, that sense of, yes, I've come with useful skills, knowledge and experience, but I'm going to need to contextualize them for this organization and I'm going to need to keep learning. And I need to be curious about what other trustees and service users and staff and other stakeholders think about this thing we're talking about. And thank you for the other comments in the chat. Yeah, there's quite a few of you saying, Sam's saying to be more precise. So that sense of not getting the clarity that you need. Very interesting that's coming out so strongly. Okay, so Anna, if you could please launch the next poll. This is a kind of bad behavior bingo. So again, it's completely anonymous. You can click as many as you like. Which of these have you experienced? Yeah, and thank you, Douglas. Challenge can be wrong. We need decent challenge, don't we? Challenge that is based on A, respect, challenging the right things, the strategic things, and based on a kind of position of knowledge, of knowing what is a decent challenge and what isn't. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So interesting. 72% of you have experienced trustees not really knowing what's going on. And I think that's back to Douglas's comment about, challenge needs to be informed, doesn't it? 32% of you have experienced trustees at loggerheads. Interesting. Quarter of you have experienced trustees who think they have nothing to learn, or I think that's quite low. That's good. 67% disengaged trustees. And 63% trustees reaching consensus very easily. This is an interesting one because this one goes under the radar. When our trustees are at loggerheads, we wouldn't not notice that. We would always notice that. When our trustees are reaching consensus, that can really, really go under the radar because it's a pleasant place to be when everybody's agreeing. So just check in with that. Have a thought, think about, is your board reaching consensus too easily? Do you need some more grit there in those discussions? Yeah, critical friend, David. Okay, so I think a couple of points about what you want from your board. It depends who you ask, doesn't it? I think, for example, chairs and CEOs are going to want different things from their boards. It depends on the charity. It's very contextual. It depends on your size. It depends on, whether you're at crisis point or not. So it does depend. Although I think in the chat, we've seen a remarkable amount of agreement over quite a few things. So let's talk more about some poor, ineffective trustee behaviour. Give me some other examples that perhaps weren't in the poll of poor behaviour that you've experienced or that you've seen or that you've done as a trustee. I don't think any of us are immune, or that you think would be ineffective if it was to happen. You might not have experienced it. So what are some of the ways in which trustees behave bad? Yeah, they're too busy to do anything. So they might have all these skills, knowledge, and experience that we need, but actually if they're too busy to help us, then that's no good. Lack of attendance, lack of staying for the whole hour meeting. Yeah. So not coming to meetings, not being engaged at meetings, not staying for the whole meetings. I was once in a meeting where somebody smoked a fag during the meeting. I was astonished. It was in the it was like COVID. We were online and it was, yeah, I was quite astonished. Yeah, so being overly operational. And thank you, Annie, because that reads as if you're a trustee. And I think that's excellent for us trustees to kind of fess up and have a good moment of reflection about where we might do better. Mine is talking too much. That might not surprise you. And I have multiple ways of managing that. Yeah, so being very cautious, not being agile, so being a bit stuck in the mud. Thank you, Shamil. Joanne, talking too much at meetings about past experiences. Yeah. And I think generally holding forth too much, talking, not listening. Dismissiveness of new ideas, the kind of we've tried that. Thank you, Joanne. Ben, I think there's a culture of amateurism in governance, appointing friends to trustee roles, which is a tough challenge. When things get tough, challenge is missing. There's so much there, Ben, and we're really going to talk about this. How do we help our trustees not be amateurs? And I don't think that most trustees are amateurs personally. Please feel free to disagree with me. But certainly we don't help through, and we're going to talk about how we can help trustees know what the role is. And yeah, recruitment is a really big one, and we're definitely going to talk about that. Karen, trustees coming with their own agenda, challenging for challenging's sake. I can't get my teeth around that one. Thank you, Lynn. Bullying, yeah. And sitting on board solely for the kudos. And thank you, Lorna. So Lorna, as a CEO, feels guilty to ask them to do anything because they're eminent or busy, or both. Jess, disengagement, an aggressive challenge from Jessica. Helen falling asleep. Oh, literally, Helen, or kind of metaphorically. I've been at meetings where people have fallen asleep. That is quite amazing. And thank you. Thank you. We've got more of it. Jess, micromanaging board papers. Yeah. Great. Thank you for those. There's so much there. Now I just want to stop here and say, not all trustees behave badly. Most trustees don't behave really badly, but I do think that we've all got an inner prat that we need to manage as trustees. We also have an inner prat as CEOs, advisors, charity staff. All humans have an inner prat. It's interesting that most of these examples, nobody said embezzling funds, I don't think. So we're talking about lower level, mainly behavioural things. That's not to say that they're not disruptive. They are hugely disruptive. But they are things often we can do something about or prevent in the first place. And I think it's really important to say that actually, even if behaviour isn't helpful, most trustees are operating in absolute good faith. So, for example, the trustee that's perhaps too operational, if you've got staff, the trustee that's too operational, they're doing that almost certainly because they're enthusiastic and they want to help. They're just not going about it the right way. So I think remembering that trustees are operating in good faith is really important. So here's a summary I prepared earlier of some of the things, some of the ways that trustees can behave ineffectively. I think we've had all of these. Let me think. Yeah, I think we've had all of those in the chat. So thank you. Um, and I just want to stop and say why we're talking about trustees rather than boards at this point. And I think it's because it's really important to remember that boards are made up of humans and these behaviours are humans perhaps getting things a bit wrong or doing their best or doing absolutely what they think is right, but we don't agree. Perhaps CEO doesn't agree what right is. And we're going to go come on to how we can agree on what right is. Okay, so I'd like you to tell me in the chat, what do trustees need to know to be effective? For example, their own governing documents. And how should trustees behave to be effective? And we've kind of been talking about some of the behaviour stuff. For example, listening, reading the papers. So tell me some of the good stuff. What do trustees need to know and how do they need to behave? Yeah, they need to know how to communicate. And thank you, Helen, for confirming that you had a trustee who literally fell asleep in a meeting. Wow. We'll have the opposite of a gold star for that one. So what do trustees need to know to be effective and how should trustees behave to be effective? And I don't think there's a definitive list here. We could come up with lots and lots of things. Sam, be interested. That doesn't feel like too much to ask, does it? But yes, we do need to say. What to do with the information they receive? That's a really good one, January. Karen, need to listen to other trustees and know the governance documents. Mike, be receptive to the expertise of staff, 100%. They need to know what they don't know. Love that, Joe. That's it, isn't it? Need to know the limitations of our knowledge, our expertise, and our skills. And part of that limitation is going to be we're now in a different organisation as a trustee. All of our prior experience will, in most cases, have been in different organisations. So we need to recognise that we have limits to what we know. Helen, eyes open, ears alert, hands behind their back, i.e. don't meddle with the operational if you have staff. If you don't have staff, you'll need your trustees to be operational. Shamal, understanding what's best for the strategic future and survival of the organisation is the most effective thing they could learn about. Steve, understand that everybody has a voice and nobody is underqualified to voice their views. Love that. And, and trustees can sometimes inadvertently stop other trustees from speaking out, can't they? And stop staff from speaking out. Andrew, what we're doing, what the responsibilities are, come to and participate at meetings. And Douglas, behaviour, proactively engaging in strategy development and having sufficient understanding to do so rather than being passive recipients. Thank you. Yeah, Lynn, need to be up to date with how the world works. For example, employees. It's really important, isn't it? And particularly if trustees are retired, we're going to need to make particular efforts to stay up to date with things. Be interested in staff and staff opinions. Need to know guidance from the Charity Commission. Yeah. Brilliant, thank you. A fantastic list. So here are, I think you've got most of these in the chat. These are some of the things that I think trustees need to know to be effective. The law. So we don't need to know charity law inside and out. Of course we don't, but we need to know enough to know when to check. If we think there might be a conflict of interest, where are we going to go? We're going to go to the Charity Commission, we're going to check and potentially with other regulators. We need to know our own rules. Again, we're probably not going to have memorized them, but we need to know broadly what our governing document talks about. It might talk about AGMs, it might talk about starting and stopping the organisation, it might talk about members, it might talk about appointing trustees. So we need to know what's broadly in it and when to check it. And I think you've come up with all of these. I'll just go down to finances. This is probably one of the greatest weaknesses of trustee boards, not understanding the organisation's finances enough. And it's a rare group of trustees that I train who don't. There's probably normally a third of trustees who would say, I need to know more. I need to go back and ask for some help to read the finances rather than kind of sitting on my hands when it comes to the budget at every meeting. We need to know some stories to be able to advocate for the charity. Say we're stuck in the lift with a local councillor. What are we going to say about the charity, and how are we going to talk about it? And then we need to know the truth, i.e., somebody else might say, "Oh, the money's fine, that grant's bound to come in," but actually, we shouldn't just take that as the truth. It's not that somebody's trying to hoodwink us, but we need to actually kind of question for ourselves. And then these are some of the ways that trustees should behave, which again have come out really strongly in the chat. Thank you for that. We've had lots about listening. We need to be able to engage in constructive debate on the right things in a respectful way and for the right reasons, i.e., we want to know because we want to reach the best decision for the charity, not because we're engaging in one-upmanship or we're waiting for us to make our most clever comment. That's not what it should be about. Let's talk about why trustees are ineffective in the first place. Why is it that sometimes we get it wrong? And there could be so many reasons for this. So give us some reasons as to why sometimes trustees are ineffective. Thank you, Jessica. It's so bizarre, isn't it? People got nothing better to do. Yeah, exactly, Joanne. I mean, this is a core reason, isn't it? A lack of understanding of what the role is. Absolutely. What other reasons are there for potentially trustees being ineffective? A lack of information, a lack of clear expectations. Julia, a lack of capacity, time, and understanding of the responsibility. So, while you're still typing, let me give a summary of the reasons, and thank you, they're still coming in, leaving everything to the chair. And actually, why do they do that? Is it because they haven't got the time? Is it because they think it's the chair's job? Is it because they haven't understood that governance is the whole board's job? Busy with other jobs and commitment, poor onboarding, working to own agenda. They weren't onboarded correctly. I mean, I think, have you seen already that in the chat, we've got a whole lot of things we can do something about, haven't we? These are things we're in control of, actually. We're not in control of someone's time or capacity. We are definitely in control of understanding, of induction, and so on. So here are some of the reasons. I mean, as I say, this isn't a definitive list, but I think these are some of the reasons that trustees are ineffective. Firstly, they're not the right person. And somebody in the chat earlier was talking about recruiting friends. That isn't really the right way to find the right person, just by kind of asking people we know. We need to think what our plans are and then recruit alongside our plans. Yeah, and Juliet, there are challenges sometimes in finding the right people. Not understanding their role, that's come out loud and clear. They think they're behaving in the right way. So sometimes there's behavior where actually the trusted, for example, being very, somebody said about aggressive challenge earlier. It's quite possible that that person thinks that is what trustees are there to do. And they're behaving in exactly the right way because nobody's told them any different. They've been recruited in the wrong way. So particularly, trustees recruiting friends. As somebody said earlier in the chat, it's very difficult to challenge people in that situation. If somebody's recruited a friend and then that friend doesn't come to meetings, that's much less likely that somebody's going to say something than if actually you've recruited them formally and got a trustee code of conduct and so on. They feel they can't leave. Sometimes that makes, trustees just, they've lost their oomph, but they feel they can't go because there's nobody else coming up behind them. They're genuinely concerned about something. Sometimes what we think is trusty bad behavior, perhaps somebody's banging on and on and on about something. Actually, perhaps they're genuinely concerned and they feel like nobody's listening. Other trustees make it difficult. So, for example, you might have a trustee that doesn't speak very much. Well, I would say that's just as likely to be somebody else's fault as it is theirs if they're feeling intimidated or shut down by other people. There's practical barriers. So, if, for example, they're receiving the papers 10 minutes before the meeting, is it any wonder that they're not reading the papers? Or if the papers are coming in 17 different emails in the 10 days before the board meeting, is it any wonder that they've missed one or two? They don't care about the charity, can make trustees ineffective. And this is a problem when through informal recruitment sometimes as well, that actually you recruit people, they're doing somebody else a favour, they don't actually really care. And they have stuff going on in their life, perhaps they're poorly. And thank you for the direct message. I've inherited a board with friends. Yeah, yes, thank you. That's difficult. Um, People have stuff going on in their lives. They're poorly. They've got new caring responsibilities they weren't expecting. There's a lot going on at work. they've got money issues. Trustees are people, and sometimes life gets in the way, and we're not always great at actually just checking in with people and asking them, I've noticed you haven't been to a couple of meetings. Is everything okay? So actually asking people and potentially giving people a chance to step down at that moment. So in terms of what might actually help people, help trustees, help boards to be effective, here are some ideas. And you'll notice this is the checklist. So I'd really encourage you to think, what is great in your organisation? What have you got nailed? And where might you need some improvements? So open recruitment with a process based on strategy. What are your ambitions, and therefore who do you need on your board? A board that's big enough but not too big. There isn't a number, but actually, 2 people isn't big enough. The largest board I worked with was 48. That's probably too big. But you need enough people, but also you don't need so many people that people can hide. Composition is really important, and refreshing is really important as well, so that composition stays relevant. A good chair, we've had some of that in the chat. It's really hard to get this right without a good chair. Induction training and development absolutely is standard. There were lots of comments in the chat about onboarding. This is our unique moment to tell people what they're signing up for. And right from the start of open recruitment as well, we need to tell people this is the deal, this is the role. And then we need to induct them really fully and properly, and then give them access to ongoing development as standard. And development very, very broadly defined. So development might include visiting other charities. It might be visiting your own services. It might be hearing from one of your trusts. It might be your treasurer talking through the finances. It might be training programs, but not necessarily. Really, really, really clear expectations and roles. So making sure your trustees have had some training on what their legal role actually is, and making sure if you've got staff, that you've got a clear demarcation between staff and trustee responsibilities, which is likely to change over time. It's likely to shift over time. So you'll want that written down in a scheme of delegation, the who does what document. And you'll also want to have discussed what behaviour you would like from your trustees, and to have written them down in a trustee code of conduct. And on the further info slide at the end, there's some examples of both of these documents if you haven't got them already. You'll want to engage your trustees with your charity's work. Now, when you're tiny, trustees are not only engaged, they're running the whole shop. But as you grow, there's a risk that there's a gap, that a gap grows between the board and the staff and the frontline work of the charity. So make sure your board is really engaged. Good board admin, as standard, for example, papers on time. And then spending time with the board beyond the board meetings. We need to build our relationships. It can't just be about the meetings. And somebody in the chat said about that, so it's not just about the meetings. And then finally, assessment and evaluation. So whether that's the board assessing itself, there's lots of tools out there, for example, the DSC Good Governance app, Charity Excellence, lots of free tools, or bringing somebody in. If you're larger and you've got a budget, ideally you'd be bringing somebody in to assess your governance. But otherwise you're marking your own homework. Now, trustees are really time poor. So of course, this needs to be really proportional, and it needs to be by agreement. It needs to be driven by the trustees, ideally. And it's best to do all of these things before problems develop. These things can help problems to not develop. And it's much better to get these done in good times rather than bad. It's quite hard. The horse is already bolted. So if things are already going pear-shaped, you're kind of trying to squeeze the stable door shut when the horse is halfway out otherwise. So try and get these things in place before. And then finally, and I don't know what time, well, I know it's 4 minutes over, but we had a stop. So, but Alexander, this is my final speaky slide. Common mistakes that I see when working with trustees. Feel free to add others in the chat or to disagree with me. That's absolutely fine. Some common mistakes that I see. Not giving this clarity that we absolutely need, kind of holding back from giving clarity. We want clarity as trustees. We want to know what the role is. We want to know how to make an impact. Mistake number 2 is lack of induction training and development. Most trustees receive little to no induction. That is a mistake, a big mistake, and it is wholly worth the investment to induct trustees properly. Asking too little of trustees. Now, I know this is hard, but I think we're either asking too little or we're asking the wrong things. So if trustees have X number of hours a year, if actually all they're doing is preparing for meetings, reading a huge board pack and following up from meetings, that's not the whole role. Are we using their time in the most effective ways? And actually, if we're working on something huge and meaty, not asking for trustee help is also a mistake. Now, they might say no, they might say, I haven't got time, but actually trustees often want something really meaty to get their teeth into. And some behavioural issues come from them not having enough to get their teeth into. If they're picking at the typos, like discussing endlessly what picture should be on the wall of the community hall, perhaps it's because they haven't got something meaty to get their teeth into. Working around them is a big mistake, trustees just as a necessary nuisance and not actually using them. Governance by tradition, i.e. you've inherited this governance from 12 previous CEOs. We have these 17 papers in this format. We have this number of meetings. We have this number of subcommittees. It's a mistake not to just keep reviewing, is this still serving us? Thinking it's all about meetings is a mistake. You're a trustee all year round. Not making space for debate is a real mistake. Neglecting relationships. We really need to invest in the relationships with our trustees, whatever role we are holding. And the biggest mistake I want to leave you with is ignoring niggles. So if you've come today because you've got some low-level niggles, I would really, really encourage you to think about what you're going to do about them, taking the bull by the horns while it's still a niggle and not something huge. For example, disengaged trustees. What are you going to do about it? Who are you going to talk to? Make a plan. So thank you very much. When you get the slides, you'll see a further help slide with some useful links. And thank you for listening, and thank you for a very, very active chat.